There is a sentence Carl Jung once wrote that has quietly haunted millions of people for decades. It wasn't written to inspire. It wasn't meant to become a motivational quote. In fact, most people who read it never truly understand what it means. He said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate." Think about that for a moment. What if the life you're living today wasn't shaped by bad luck? Not by your past, not by your circumstances, but by something happening inside your own mind before you even realize it's there. Every morning, within the first few moments after you open your eyes, something invisible begins to happen. A conversation starts. It is silent, automatic, and so familiar that you rarely notice it. Yet that conversation quietly determines how you feel, how you behave, the decisions you make, the opportunities you recognize, and ultimately the person you become. Carl Jung believed it begins much earlier. It begins with the first thought. The frightening part is that nearly all of us wake up repeating the exact same mental patterns we repeated yesterday, and the day before, and the year before that. We relive old fears before we've even touched the floor. We rehearse imaginary failures before anything has happened. We replay conversations that no longer matter. We carry invisible burdens into a brand new day, then wonder why nothing ever changes. But what if there were a different way? What if the first words you speak to yourself each morning could slowly rewrite the architecture of your mind? What if changing just a few minutes of your morning could begin changing your entire reality? This isn't about pretending problems don't exist. It isn't about repeating empty affirmations while ignoring reality. And it certainly isn't another self-help trick promising overnight success. This goes far deeper than positive thinking. It reaches into the hidden machinery of the unconscious mind, the place Carl Jung spent his entire life trying to understand. According to Jung, every human being carries within them an unseen world more powerful than the one outside. A world made of forgotten memories, hidden beliefs, emotional patterns, fears, dreams, symbols, and untapped potential. Most people spend their entire lives reacting to this invisible world without ever realizing it exists. Imagine trying to steer a ship while someone else secretly controls the rudder beneath the deck. You believe you're choosing your direction, you believe you're making your own decisions, yet the course was decided long before you became aware of it. This is how the unconscious works. It quietly shapes your reality while convincing you that reality simply happened. Perhaps that's why two people can experience the same failure, yet one becomes stronger while the other gives up forever. Perhaps that's why one person sees opportunity where another sees only obstacles. Perhaps that's why some people seem almost magnetic to success, while others spend decades wondering why nothing changes despite working harder than everyone else. The difference may not be intelligence. It may not be talent. It may not even be discipline. The difference begins with something almost nobody pays attention to: the first conversation they have with themselves each morning. Long before modern neuroscience discovered the brain's remarkable ability to reshape itself, Jung understood something extraordinary. He believed that the unconscious mind responds not only to what happens to us, but to the meaning we continuously assign to our experiences. Every thought repeated with enough emotion becomes part of our psychological reality. Every belief rehearsed day after day slowly transforms into identity. Eventually, we stop questioning these inner stories because they begin to feel like absolute truth. The most dangerous beliefs are never the loud ones. They're the quiet sentences you've repeated so many times that they no longer sound like opinions. They sound like facts. I'm not good enough. People like me never succeed. I always fail. It's too late. This is just who I am. These sentences don't merely describe your life, they quietly create it. Without realizing it, millions of people wake up every morning and immediately begin feeding these invisible programs. Before breakfast, they've already reminded themselves why success feels impossible. Before leaving the house, they've already imagined everything that could go wrong. Before speaking to another person, they've already defeated themselves internally, and then they call the outcome fate. But Jung challenged that idea completely. He believed fate often wears the mask of unconscious habit. Change the habit, and you begin changing what once looked like destiny. This is why mornings matter so much. The first moments after waking are unlike any other part of the day. Your conscious mind is only beginning to awaken, while your unconscious remains unusually receptive. It's a doorway between two worlds, a brief period where old patterns can either strengthen themselves or begin to break apart. Most people waste this doorway without ever realizing its value. They immediately check notifications, scroll through bad news, replay yesterday's stress, carry yesterday's identity into today's opportunities. Then they wonder why tomorrow looks exactly the same. But there is another possibility, a possibility Jung hinted at throughout his life's work, a possibility hidden beneath psychology, philosophy, and the symbols of the unconscious. A simple daily practice that doesn't require money, status, special talent, or extraordinary intelligence. Only awareness, and if practiced consistently, it has the power to slowly transform not only how you think, but who you become. Because reality rarely changes before identity changes, and identity rarely changes before the unconscious begins speaking a different language. In the next few minutes, we're going to explore why the words you choose every morning may be shaping your future more than your education, your circumstances, or even your past. More importantly, you'll discover why Carl Jung believed that mastering this invisible conversation is one of the greatest acts of personal transformation a human being can ever achieve. But before we uncover the first morning practice that begins this transformation, we need to understand something almost no one has ever taught you. The answer begins with a truth that modern neuroscience is only now beginning to appreciate, but Carl Jung understood nearly a century ago. The unconscious mind does not argue with repetition. It doesn't pause to ask whether a thought is true or false. It simply observes what you consistently feed it and slowly transforms that information into the blueprint of your identity. Think about how children learn. A child is not born believing they are intelligent or incapable, confident or insecure, worthy or unworthy. Those beliefs are installed over time through thousands of repeated experiences, words, emotions, and interpretations. Every compliment, every criticism, every success, every embarrassment leaves a small imprint beneath conscious awareness. Eventually, those imprints connect together until they become an invisible map of reality. By adulthood, most people mistake that map for the world itself, but it isn't the world. It's only the story they've been telling themselves for years. Imagine placing on a pair of glasses with a barely noticeable tint. At first, you recognize the color. After a few hours, your brain adjusts. After a few days, you forget the glasses are even there. Eventually, you believe the world itself has changed color. That is exactly how unconscious beliefs operate. You no longer notice them. You simply experience life through them. This is why two people can wake up on the exact same morning under identical circumstances and experience two completely different realities. One sees possibility, the other sees danger. One notices opportunities, the other notices obstacles. One expects progress, the other expects disappointment. The external world has not changed, the internal lens has. Jung believed that what we fail to make conscious begins expressing itself through our emotions, our habits, our relationships, and even the events we repeatedly attract into our lives. Not because of magic, but because our unconscious quietly influences every decision we make without asking for permission. Every avoided opportunity, every conversation left unfinished, every dream abandoned before it begins, often starts with a single unnoticed thought. They'll reject me. I'm not ready. It's safer not to try. These thoughts seem harmless because they disappear almost as quickly as they arrive, yet they leave behind something much more permanent, a direction. And direction, repeated every day, eventually becomes destiny. Perhaps you've experienced this yourself. Have you ever delayed making an important decision because you convinced yourself the timing wasn't right? Have you ever remained silent when you wanted to speak because you feared judgment? Have you ever watched someone else achieve something you secretly desired and told yourself they were simply luckier than you? Those moments rarely happen because reality limits us first. More often, The limitation begins inside. Carl Jung spent decades studying dreams, symbols, myths, and human behavior because he believed our greatest obstacles were rarely external. They lived within the unconscious, hidden beneath layers of habit and emotional conditioning. The tragedy is that most people spend their lives trying to change their circumstances without ever changing the inner dialogue producing those circumstances. They change jobs, they move cities, they buy new things, they chase new relationships, yet somehow the same frustrations keep following them. Different environments, the same internal conversation, different faces, the same fears, different goals, the same doubts. Because wherever the unconscious goes, your reality quietly follows. This is why so many people work incredibly hard and still feel stuck. They believe success requires more effort. Sometimes what it actually requires is a different identity. And identity begins with language. The words you repeatedly whisper to yourself become emotional habits. Those emotional habits become behavioral habits. Behavioral habits become character. And character shapes the course of an entire lifetime. That is why mornings hold extraordinary power. The first moments after waking are not just the beginning of another day. They are the beginning of another version of yourself. Every morning you unconsciously answer a question: who am I today? Most people answer it automatically. They answer with yesterday's fears, yesterday's disappointments, yesterday's identity. Then they unknowingly recreate yesterday's life. But imagine answering that question differently. Imagine beginning every morning by deliberately choosing thoughts that strengthen rather than weaken you. Imagine teaching your unconscious a new story, one rooted not in fantasy, but in possibility. Imagine slowly replacing fear with awareness, scarcity with purpose, self-criticism with disciplined self-respect. That is not wishful thinking. It is psychological training. It is the gradual reshaping of the unconscious through conscious intention. And according to Jung, that is where genuine transformation begins. Because the greatest battle any human being will ever fight is not against the outside world, it is against the invisible patterns they carry within. The beautiful news is this: invisible patterns can be rewritten, not overnight, not through blind optimism, but through small, consistent actions repeated with awareness. That is exactly what you're about to discover. Over the course of this journey, we're going to explore a simple morning practice inspired by Carl Jung's understanding of the unconscious mind. Each step builds upon the last. Each morning exercise reveals another hidden layer of your psychology. And by the end, you'll understand why changing the first few minutes of your day can slowly begin changing every hour that follows. You'll learn why your internal dialogue is far more influential than you realize. Why the unconscious responds to symbols, emotions, and repetition. Why your morning identity determines your daily behavior. And most importantly, you'll discover the simple words and mental habits that can begin shifting your perception of reality from the inside out. Because once your inner world changes, your outer world has no choice but to respond differently. If this message has already made you question the conversations happening inside your own mind, take a moment to subscribe and join this community. Every week, we explore the timeless wisdom of Carl Jung, psychology, philosophy, and the hidden forces that shape human consciousness, not through empty motivation, but through ideas that invite real transformation. Now that we've uncovered why your mornings hold such extraordinary psychological power, the next question becomes impossible to ignore. Have you ever noticed that the very first thoughts you have each morning almost always feel familiar? Before your feet touch the floor, before the world demands your attention, before you check your phone, your mind has already begun telling you a story. For some people, that story begins with pressure. I have too much to do. For others, it begins with anxiety. What if today goes wrong? And for millions of people, it begins with quiet self-judgment. I'm already behind. Nothing ever changes. Here we go again. Most people believe these thoughts simply appear. Carl Jung believes something very different. He believed these thoughts are not random visitors. They are echoes. Echoes of the unconscious. Echoes of beliefs that have been repeated so often they now speak automatically, without effort, without permission, and without your awareness. The tragedy is not that these thoughts exist. The tragedy is that most people mistake them for truth. Imagine waking every morning inside a room where the walls quietly whisper the same sentences over and over again. You are not enough. Be careful. Don't fail. Stay small. At first, you would recognize those voices as separate from yourself, but after years of hearing them, you would eventually believe they were your own. This is how unconscious conditioning works. The voice feels like you, yet much of it was inherited, perhaps from childhood, perhaps from fear, perhaps from painful experiences you never fully processed, perhaps from parents who themselves were carrying invisible wounds. Jung understood that every human being inherits far more than physical traits. We inherit emotional patterns, ways of interpreting the world, ways of responding to uncertainty, ways of speaking to ourselves. Without realizing it, many people spend decades living someone else's psychological script. A parent who constantly worried about money, a teacher who convinced them they weren't intelligent, a relationship that taught them they weren't lovable, a failure that quietly became an identity. These moments disappear from memory, but they remain alive within the unconscious. Like seeds buried beneath the surface, they continue producing thoughts long after the original experience has ended. This is why your first morning practice is not about forcing yourself to think positively. It is about becoming aware. Awareness always comes before transformation. Jung often emphasized that what remains unconscious continues controlling our lives from the shadows. You cannot change what you refuse to notice. Imagine trying to repair a machine while refusing to open it. That is exactly what most people attempt to do with their minds. They chase motivation. They search for confidence. They buy productivity systems. They look for external solutions. Yet they never examine the invisible operating system running everything underneath. Your first task is remarkably simple. Tomorrow morning, before speaking, before checking your phone, before standing up, simply listen. Listen to the first thoughts your mind produces. Do not judge them. Do not fight them. Do not replace them. Just observe. Become a scientist studying your own consciousness. Ask yourself, what is my mind trying to convince me of? What identity is this thought reinforcing? Would I say these words to someone I deeply love? That final question changes everything, because most people would never speak to another human being the way they speak to themselves. Imagine your closest friend tells you they're nervous about a new opportunity. Would you immediately respond, "You're going to fail"? "You're not talented enough." Or, "Don't even try"? Of course not. You would encourage them. You would remind them of their strengths. You would help them see possibilities they cannot yet see. Yet every morning, millions of people become their own harshest enemy, not because they hate themselves, but because they have practiced self-criticism for so long that it feels normal. Jung believed genuine transformation begins the moment you separate yourself from the voice inside your head. Because you are not the voice, you are the awareness listening to it. This distinction may seem small. In reality, it changes everything. If you believe every thought, you become trapped by every thought. If you observe every thought, you become free to choose a different one. Think of the sky. Clouds continuously pass overhead. Some are bright, some are dark, some bring storms. Others disappear within minutes. The sky never fights the clouds. It simply allows them to pass. Your consciousness is the sky. Your thoughts are only the clouds. The problem is that most people mistake themselves for the storm. Jung spent decades exploring dreams because dreams reveal something extraordinary. The unconscious is constantly communicating, not through logic, but through symbols, patterns, images, emotions. Your morning thoughts are no different. They are messages, not commands. Messages inviting you to investigate what still lives beneath the surface. Instead of asking, "Why am I thinking this?" begin asking, "What is this thought trying to protect me from?" Fear often disguises itself as practicality. Self-doubt often disguises itself as realism. Perfectionism often disguises itself as responsibility. But beneath each one lies an unconscious belief waiting to be understood. The moment awareness enters, the unconscious begins losing its power. Imagine walking into a dark room you feared your entire life. From outside, your imagination creates monsters, but the instant you switch on the light, you discover ordinary furniture. The fear was never created by reality. It was created by darkness. Awareness is that light, and every morning offers another opportunity to switch it on. But awareness alone is not enough. Recognizing the old program is only the beginning. The next challenge is far more difficult, because once you hear the unconscious voice, you must decide whether to keep believing it or begin writing an entirely new story. And that is exactly where Carl Jung's greatest lesson begins. Now that you've begun observing the voice inside your mind, you may notice something surprising. The thoughts haven't stopped. They're still there. The doubts still appear. The fears still whisper. The old beliefs still return with remarkable consistency. At first, this can feel discouraging. Many people assume that becoming aware of their unconscious patterns should immediately eliminate them. When that doesn't happen, they conclude that nothing is changing. Carl Jung would argue the opposite. He believed that awareness is not the end of transformation. It is the beginning of it. Think of an old forest trail. If thousands of people walk the same path every day for years, the ground becomes firm. The trail becomes obvious. Walking it requires almost no effort. Now imagine trying to create an entirely new path. The first few steps are difficult. Branches stand in your way. Tall grass hides the direction. Every step demands conscious effort. But if you continue walking that new path day after day, something remarkable happens. The old trail slowly disappears. The new one becomes natural. Your unconscious works in exactly the same way. Every repeated thought strengthens an existing pathway. Every new thought begins creating another. Transformation isn't about deleting the old path overnight. It's about walking the new one until it becomes your default direction. This is why your morning words matter so profoundly, not because they magically change reality, but because they slowly change the person experiencing reality. Jung often described the psyche as something alive, dynamic, constantly evolving, always moving toward greater wholeness if we allow it to. Yet most people unknowingly interrupt that process by repeating the same inner dialogue every single day. Imagine planting a seed while digging it up every morning to check whether it has grown. No matter how fertile the soil, no matter how healthy the seed, growth becomes impossible. Many people treat their own transformation this way. They speak differently for one day, then immediately ask, "Why hasn't my life changed?" They try again the next morning, then doubt the process by evening. But nature doesn't reward impatience, neither does the unconscious. It rewards consistency. Every morning, you are either reinforcing yesterday's identity or rehearsing tomorrow's. There is no neutral ground. This brings us to one of Jung's most powerful psychological insights. The unconscious responds more strongly to emotion than to information. You can repeat a sentence 1,000 times without believing it, and almost nothing changes. But say one meaningful sentence while genuinely feeling it, and the unconscious begins paying attention. This is why empty affirmations often fail. Standing in front of a mirror saying, "I am successful. I am fearless. I am unstoppable," means very little if another voice inside immediately answers, "No, you're not." The unconscious notices the conflict. Jung never encouraged pretending. He encouraged integration. Instead of forcing yourself to believe something impossible, begin with something truthful, something that opens the door rather than closes it. Replace, "I'll never succeed," with, "I am learning what success requires." Replace, "I always fail," with, "Every experience is teaching me something valuable." Replace, "I'm not confident." with, I'm becoming someone who acts despite uncertainty. Notice the difference. The first statements create resistance. The second create movement. Growth always begins with movement. Your unconscious doesn't need perfection. It needs direction. Imagine standing on the shore of an enormous ocean. You cannot cross it in a single leap. But one step into the water changes your relationship with the entire sea. One thought cannot transform your life, but one repeated thought can begin transforming your identity. Identity is not something you discover. It is something you continuously practice. This explains why highly successful people often appear so different from everyone else. It isn't because they never experience fear. It isn't because they never doubt themselves. It is because they have trained themselves to answer fear differently. Where one person hears, "You'll fail," another hears, "This is how growth feels." Where one hears, "This is impossible," another hears, "I haven't found the solution yet." The external challenge remains identical. The internal conversation changes everything. Jung believed every person carries within them an image of their highest potential. He called this the process of individuation, the gradual unfolding of the person you were always capable of becoming. Notice something important. He did not say you create a completely new self. He believed you uncover the self that has always existed beneath fear, conditioning, and unconscious habit. Imagine a magnificent statue hidden inside a block of marble. The sculptor does not create the figure. He removes everything that doesn't belong. Your unconscious transformation follows the same principle. You are not becoming someone fake. You are removing years of psychological noise that convinced you to forget who you truly are. This changes the purpose of your morning practice. You are no longer trying to become worthy. You are remembering that your worth was never dependent on your fears. You are no longer trying to manufacture confidence. You are uncovering the confidence hidden beneath years of self-doubt. Every conscious morning thought becomes another strike of the sculptor's chisel. Every compassionate sentence removes another layer of unnecessary fear. Every moment of awareness reveals another piece of the person waiting beneath. But there is one obstacle almost everyone encounters at this stage: resistance. The moment you begin changing your inner dialogue, the old identity fights back. It whispers, "This isn't you," or "You're pretending," or "This won't last." Jung warned that whenever we approach genuine transformation, the unconscious often resists because familiar suffering feels safer than unfamiliar growth. The old personality wants certainty, even if that certainty is painful. Growth demands uncertainty, even if that uncertainty leads to freedom. Do not mistake resistance for failure. Resistance is often evidence that something important is changing. Think about exercising a muscle. The discomfort isn't proof you're becoming weaker. It's proof the muscle is adapting. The mind behaves similarly. Every time you interrupt an old belief, every time you replace self-criticism with awareness, every time you refuse to repeat yesterday's story, you are strengthening an entirely new psychological foundation. At first, no one else will notice. Then one day, you respond calmly where you once reacted emotionally. You take action where you once hesitated. You speak with confidence where you once remained silent. The world appears to change, but the real change happened quietly, inside the conversations no one else could hear. And yet, there is an even deeper level to this transformation, because observing your thoughts and replacing your thoughts is only part of the journey. Carl Jung believed the greatest breakthroughs occur when you begin speaking not as the person you have been, but as the person you are destined to become. And that is where the most extraordinary part of this journey begins.